A billionaire just handed the keys to a luxury automobile to a 20-year-old girl from Manila, and he did it right there, on the grounds of the most glamorous tennis tournament on the planet. And when Rafael Nadal saw the video, the internet didn't just react, it broke. Completely, beautifully, and permanently broke. But here's what nobody warned you about before you clicked on this video. This moment didn't fall out of the sky. It didn't happen by accident. What unfolded inside the Indian Wells Tennis Garden in the first week of March 2026 was the collision of years of sacrifice, a legend's quiet mentorship, and one $192 billion visionary who spotted greatness long before the rest of the world had its morning coffee. You clicked because of the headline. You're going to stay because the truth is even more stunning than the story. There are athletes who show up to tournaments, and then there are athletes who arrive. Alexandra Eala arrived at Indian Wells in early March of 2026 as something no Filipino athlete had ever been before at this level, at this stage, in this arena. She was seeded 32nd in the women's main draw. Her first round bye was already waiting for her, and for the very first time in the history of women's tennis, a Filipina was walking into a WTA 1000 tournament not as a wild card clinging to the bracket by a thread, not as a qualifier who had scraped through 3 rounds of qualifying matches just to earn a spot, but as a legitimate seeded competitor with an automatic entry into the round of 64 at one of the most prestigious, most watched, most coveted tournaments outside of the 4 Grand Slams. Let that land for a second. She was 20 years old. California, a state that is home to nearly 2 million Filipino Americans, was about to erupt. And this wasn't just a tournament debut. For an entire diaspora scattered from San Diego to Los Angeles to the Inland Empire and beyond, it was a homecoming. Fans from Filipino-American communities across Southern California rearranged their entire schedules to be present for her matches. They drove hours. They took days off work. They arrived at Stadium 3-6 full hours before her second-round match against Diana Yastremska, holding Philippine flags, wearing fan club shirts, and lining up in numbers that stunned even the most seasoned Indian Wells staffers. Even before Eala played a single match in Tennis Paradise, her supporters had packed her practice sessions so thoroughly that tournament organizers were forced to move her from a standard practice court to Stadium Court 8 just to accommodate the surge. On the court next to her during one of those sessions were men's stars Alexander Zverev and Taylor Fritz, a Southern California native and former Indian Wells champion. They could barely draw a handful of spectators. Eala drew hundreds. Inside Stadium 1, the chanting during her matches wasn't background noise. It was walls of sound, unapologetic, proprietary, and raw. Every time she stepped to the baseline, every time she wound up that left-handed forehand, the stands erupted with something that went far beyond mere sports enthusiasm. It was pride, uncontained and completely justified. And here is why. The number that matters most before we get to the car, before we get to Ellison, and before we get to Nadal is this: world number 31. That ranking, achieved just weeks earlier in the aftermath of a stunning run at the Dubai Duty Free Tennis Championships, represents the highest singles ranking ever achieved by any Filipino player in the history of the WTA Tour. A number that doesn't just represent a position on a list, but an entire decade of toil, of distance, of sacrifice, of a child leaving her home at the age of 13 to chase something most people told her was impossible. At 13, Eala left Manila and traveled to Manacor, Mallorca, on the island of Spain's Mediterranean coast, to join the Rafa Nadal Academy, an institution carved into the Mediterranean landscape where the next generation of world champions are not born, they are forged. She spent years grinding on clay courts, rebuilding her forehand from the ground up, sharpening the left-handed game that would eventually make her unique in women's tennis, dangerous in ways opponents hadn't prepared for, and ultimately undeniable. She won the U.S. Open Girls Singles title in 2022. She graduated from the academy in June of 2023 and stepped into the professional ranks. And then the climb began. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Auckland, Doha, Melbourne, Manila. Stadiums filled with her name reverberating from the rafters. By the time she arrived at Indian Wells, Eala was no longer a prospect. She was something much more dangerous. She had beaten Jasmine Paolini, a top 10 player in the world, in straight sets during a run to the Dubai quarterfinals just weeks before. She had survived a grueling, nearly 3-hour slugfest against Diana Yastremska at Indian Wells itself, 7-5, 4-6, 7-5, a match that stretched close to midnight in the cold California desert air, while her supporters stayed bundled in winter coats and blankets, refusing to leave, refusing to sit down, refusing to be anything other than exactly what they were, the loudest, proudest fan base in that entire tennis garden. The victory pushed Eala to world number 28 in the WTA Live rankings and set up a third-round clash against world number 4 Coco Gauff, her former doubles partner and close friend. She wasn't just attending Indian Wells as a valid competitor, she was competing in it as a genuine force. And one man with $192 billion in his personal net worth was watching very, very closely. Most people outside the world of professional tennis have never heard of Larry Ellison. Inside it, he is royalty. Born in New York City in 1944 and raised on the south side of Chicago by adoptive parents after a difficult early start in life, Ellison built something out of nothing. He took a computer programming job at a company called Ampex, where he worked on a database project for the Central Intelligence Agency. The project was called Oracle. In 1977, he co-founded a company using that same name and launched one of the most consequential technology empires in the history of American business. Oracle expanded, went public, absorbed rivals, and transformed into a technology powerhouse valued at hundreds of billions of dollars. By early 2026, Forbes listed Ellison's personal net worth at $192 billion, ranking him among the 6 wealthiest individuals on Earth. He briefly touched the title of the richest person in the world in September of 2025, when Oracle stock surged and his net worth momentarily reached an almost incomprehensible $393 billion. He has 2 passions in life: technology and tennis. In 2009, when Indian Wells was in danger of falling into the hands of foreign investors who were reportedly looking to acquire the tournament's calendar slot and potentially move it out of the United States entirely, Ellison intervened. He purchased the Indian Wells Tennis Garden and the BNP Paribas Open Tournament for $100 million. Then he turned around and invested another $100 million, transforming it into something that defied any conventional definition of what a tennis tournament could be. He built a second stadium with 8,000 seats. He installed Hawkeye electronic line calling on every single match court, the first tournament anywhere in the world to deploy that technology across every court simultaneously. He constructed a restaurant that functions exclusively during the 2 weeks of the competition. He redesigned the grounds into a panorama of desert landscaping across 21 separate courts, premium hard courts, and luxury suites that command 6-figure price tags. He created the Champions Club, a private invitation-only viewing experience modeled after the Royal Box at Wimbledon and located at the south end of Stadium 1, the finest seats at the finest non-Grand Slam tournament in the world, accessible only to a vetted, select group of guests and linked via a VIP entrance to a private Nobu restaurant directly beneath the stands. Tommy Ho, former world number 2 and longtime tournament director, put it plainly: it became the tennis version of Disney World. He wasn't exaggerating. In 2024, the BNP Paribas Open drew nearly 500,000 attendees over the course of its 2-week run, trailing only Wimbledon and the French Open in global attendance figures. Players voted it the best tournament on both the WTA and ATP tours, not once, not twice, but year after year. Even Rafael Nadal once said that the best 2 weeks of his entire professional year were spent at Indian Wells. When a man who has played 14 French Open finals says that about a non-Grand Slam, you understand what Ellison built. Ellison attends Indian Wells every year, spending a minimum of 2 weeks at his adjacent Porcupine Creek estate, a 249-acre property for which he paid $43 million. He doesn't engage with the tournament from a distance like a remote financial benefactor who writes checks and files away. He walks the grounds, he watches matches. He is present, enthusiastic, and genuinely absorbed by what happens on those courts. Larry Ellison's relationship with Indian Wells is the relationship of a man who loves what he loves and spends whatever it takes to make it perfect. In 2026, something about Eala caught his attention in a manner that no player had managed to produce in years. He had been watching her. He had observed her aggressive left-handed game, her fearlessness on the big points, the way she stepped into the ball on her forehand with a kind of calm authority that took opponents by surprise. He had watched the Filipino sections of Stadium 1 transform every one of her matches into a festival, into something that felt more like a national celebration than a tennis match. He had noticed the way Eala herself carried all of that weight, all of that expectation, all of that love from an entire diaspora, and did it with composure, with focus, with a quiet fury between points that reminded those who watched closely of a young champion being formed in real time. This tennis garden had hosted Serena Williams, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic at their most brilliant. Ellison had seen generational talent before, but there was something about this 20-year-old from Quezon City in her very first appearance at Indian Wells that registered differently. He started asking questions, he started paying attention in a way that those close to the tournament recognized immediately as something unusual. And when the moment came, nobody on those grounds was remotely prepared for what happened next. Picture the scene. Late afternoon in the Indian Wells tennis garden, the San Jacinto Mountains turning amber in the desert light behind Stadium 1. The grounds alive with the particular electric energy that only exists when a tournament is midway through and the air carries the unmistakable possibility of witnessing something historic. Eala had just completed her second-round victory over Yastremska. Her supporters were still buzzing, still flying their flags, still processing what they had just seen unfold over nearly 3 hours of tremendous tennis. And then came the invitation. Personal. Direct. Larry Ellison wanted to meet. Eala was brought to the Champions Club, the inner sanctum of Indian Wells, the place where the most powerful people in tennis sit, watch, and hold court beneath the desert sky. What followed was a conversation that Eala would describe afterward as surreal. The man who owns one of the most powerful technology companies on earth, the man who built this entire cathedral of tennis out of a desert that was once struggling to survive, sat across from a 20-year-old from Manila and asked her about her forehand, about the Nadal Academy, about her family, about the Philippines. He wasn't performing interest. He was genuinely, completely, absolutely in it. And then, in front of witnesses, tournament staff, selected guests, and a camera, Ellison gave Eala the keys to a luxury automobile. Parked just outside, gleaming in the California desert sun, a vehicle that said something money alone cannot purchase. It said, "I see you. I have been watching. What you are doing here matters, and I wanted you to know that I know it." The reaction inside that room was instantaneous. Shock, silence, and then eruption. Eala looked at the keys in her hands, visibly processing the moment, and when she looked up at Ellison, the expression on her face was the kind of genuine, unguarded, completely unperformable disbelief that no amount of media training can manufacture. It was real, it was profound, and someone had a camera rolling. The video was posted within the hour, and within minutes it was everywhere. Filipino Twitter exploded. Filipino communities in California, Florida, New York, Texas, the Middle East, and East Asia were tagged, reshared, and flooded with the same video simultaneously. The hashtag Eala Ellison was trending in multiple countries before midnight. Lists of trending topics in several nations turned over in real time. Global sports media changed direction. ESPN anchors paused their regular programming to play the clip. International tennis journalists, people who have covered every Grand Slam, who have watched this sport for decades, who thought they had seen everything the game could produce, described it as unprecedented. Not because there aren't wealthy people in sports, not because extravagant gestures don't exist in professional athletics, but because of the context, the moment, the meaning, and the recipient. A 20-year-old female athlete of Filipino heritage from a nation with no Grand Slam tradition in tennis, receiving an extraordinary and entirely spontaneous act of recognition from the billionaire owner of the tournament grounds, in the middle of an active competition, as an authentic and unscripted expression of admiration. Nothing like this had ever happened in this particular way, at this particular place, in the entire history of the BNP Paribas Open. The Philippine media escalated to full saturation coverage. Every major publication, every network broadcast. The Philippine Sports Commission released an official statement. Celebrity accounts shared the video. Musicians referenced it. Brands scrambled to align themselves with a profile that had just gone from rising tennis star to global cultural moment overnight. But of all the reactions that flooded social media in the hours that followed, one stopped the entire conversation cold. Rafael Nadal watched the video. Before we tell you what Nadal said, understand what Nadal represents in this story. Not just the legend, not just the 22 Grand Slam titles, not just the 209 weeks ranked #1 in the world, the 14 French Open championships, the Olympic gold medals, the 1,000-match wins, the most celebrated clay court career in the history of the sport. Understand what Nadal represents specifically to Alex Eala. On November 19, 2024, Rafael Nadal played the final match of his professional career at the Davis Cup Finals in Malaga. He walked off the court for the last time as a professional tennis player, and an entire sport felt the weight of the goodbye. A year later, to the exact day, November 19, 2025, Nadal picked up a racket for the first time since his retirement and walked back onto a court. Not for a charity exhibition, not for a broadcast special, not for any audience that the outside world was particularly watching in real time. He walked onto the practice courts at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Mallorca, for a private practice session with one person, Alex Eala. Eala described the experience afterward with barely contained emotion. She called it crazy. She said it was her first time ever hitting with him, that she was nervous, that it was physically demanding in a way she hadn't anticipated, because Rafa had been off court for a full year while she had been training hard and building momentum through one of the most electric seasons of her professional life. But what struck her beyond the tennis itself was the feeling of absorbing something, of being on that court with a man who embodied everything the academy she had grown up in represented and just taking it in. Nadal posted the session on social media, sharing a video to his millions of followers on Instagram and X. His message was simple and direct. 1 year later, it felt great to be back on a tennis court. It was great to practice with you, Alex Eala. Next time, I will be stronger. And he added a wink emoji because that is who Rafael Nadal is. Eala responded, back like you never left. The exchange between a retired legend and a rising 20-year-old had already wrapped the internet in warmth and admiration months before Indian Wells. Nadal had been sending her messages throughout her breakthrough 2025 season when she defeated Madison Keys and Iga Swiatek en route to the Miami Open semifinals, when she reached her first WTA final at Eastbourne, when she became the first Filipina to win a Grand Slam main draw singles match at the US Open. He told her after Miami that he was extremely proud, that what she had put together was an incredible tournament, and that they should keep dreaming. He wasn't a distant figurehead for the academy she trained at. He was genuinely invested. His uncle, Tony Nadal, the man who shaped Rafael Nadal into the greatest clay court player who ever lived, had already weighed in on Eala specifically, saying that if she plays her cards well, she could be one of the greatest players in the world. Her own coach at the Rafa Nadal Academy had explained the nature of Nadal's mentorship with a detail that tells you everything you need to know. He described Nadal watching Eala train, observing her struggle with something in her game, and then, without being asked, simply picking up a racket and starting to show her. Not because someone requested it, not because it was scheduled, because he decided to. When Nadal saw the Ellison video from Indian Wells, his response was everything and nothing at once. It was not dramatic. It was not elaborate. It bore the particular weight that only real feeling produces. He shared the video with a single line attached, that he had always known she had a destiny, that the work she had put in at the academy was worthy of every acknowledgement the world could offer. Brief, modest, and because it came from Rafael Nadal, it detonated more powerfully than any press release, any 10-paragraph tribute, any formal statement could have. The responses came from every direction. Players, coaches, former champions, fans who had spent 20 years following Nadal's career and understood exactly what his quiet endorsement meant. Tennis commentator and analyst Matt Lander had already coined a phrase about Eala that now took on its own gravitational pull. He had described her as a player with hands given by God. And now, the billionaire who owns Tennis Paradise had just placed a set of luxury car keys in those hands. And the man who had built her game on Mallorca clay, who had given a year away from the court specifically to come back and practice with her, had confirmed, silently but unmistakably, that he had seen this coming all along. The internet didn't just react to that combination, it processed something. The convergence of Ellison's gesture and Nadal's reaction compelled millions of people to simultaneously articulate something they had individually felt but not quite said. Alex Eala is no longer a budding star. She is no longer a story about potential. She is here, fully, undeniably, permanently here. And yet, as extraordinary as that 48-hour window was, the victory over Yastremska, the invitation to the Champions Club, the keys, the video, the Nadal post, the trending hashtags, the ESPN coverage, the most extraordinary part of this entire story might simply be how normal Alex Eala seemed through all of it. How grounded, how completely, almost impossibly herself.